Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? I don't want to make any assumptions about our audience out here today, so if you live outside of Allegheny County, could you raise your hand? Okay. Maybe I should have said, those that live in Allegheny County, can I see your hand? Okay. The second part of that question is, if you live outside the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, can you raise your hand? Okay. What I'll do is I'll give a quick overview of what we do to assist our first responders from the Allegheny County Department of Emergency Services. Basically what we're set up as under Title 35, which is our enabling legislation for emergency management. We at the county level coordinate resources for our public safety entities throughout our county. Allegheny County is comprised of 130 municipalities. Because Pennsylvania is a Commonwealth, the local jurisdiction has responsibility for emergency preparedness for each of the municipalities. So we're there as a support mechanism, if you will, to support their efforts. The picture you see, and Ray's going to cry foul on me because he also has it in his presentation, but I think it is that important to see it twice today. That is actually a Bakken Crude train that traverses throughout Allegheny County and the city of Pittsburgh on a daily basis. So we're very familiar with the fact that we do have these trains coming through both Allegheny County and the city of Pittsburgh. I wanted to focus a little bit on emergency management because that's really what we do in Allegheny County Department of Emergency Services from a support tool to our local municipalities. It's a big puzzle, if you will. We talk about 4 phases of emergency management, and we could be involved in any of these 4 phases any given time. They're not linear, they're very cyclic, if you will, and there's different things that are going on every day within Allegheny County. Where I'd like to start at, though, is the mitigation, preparedness, and prevention side of that picture that's up there. We spend a lot of time, if you look at the mitigation, I apologize, it got a little granular as I tried to email the file, but what we're trying to do during mitigation and prevention is trying to perform a hazard vulnerability assessment of our communities and determine what threats, what vulnerabilities that we have, and then, in essence, try to do away with them. Unfortunately, we cannot do away with all of those threats and vulnerabilities, so if we cannot, then we move into that next phase of preparedness. What we try to do then is prepare for those emergencies that are going to affect us, still keeping in mind trying to limit the exposure that we would have to those emergencies, try to lessen the effect that that type of emergency would have on us throughout our county. The next, if we're appropriately prepared, then we go into a response phase. That's typically where everybody sees us. That's where you see the hazardous materials response vehicles going out, the fire, police, EMS vehicles. That's the flashy portion of our jobs that get us, on within the news media, and people pretty much figure out that's what we do on a daily basis. But again, that portion is so minute to the overall responsibility that we have from a all hazards approach to emergency management. The most important phase is our recovery phase. After we have that emergency that we respond to, even during that response phase of that emergency, we're out there trying to recover our municipalities back to the way they were prior to that event occurring, but then taking the lessons learned from that event and trying to make our communities even more resilient so they're sustainable throughout our county as a whole. So what's going on during these phases? During mitigation, we're working on public education. This is a perfect mitigation phase program that we're doing here today. Educating people on the task at hand with Bakken Crude and the way that we're preparing to be able to respond out to that. We also perform our hazard vulnerability assessment and improve our infrastructure from those reviews that we do of what our threats, what our vulnerabilities are, and then also look at things that are happened similarly to that threat or vulnerability and try to improve upon our infrastructure. The preparedness efforts are where we develop our emergency operations plans, our emergency response plans, and then important for our first responders are exercising those plans to actually go out and put that plan to the test to make sure that we've identified the threat and vulnerability correctly, that we've developed an action plan that we can respond efficiently and effectively, and then also identify the resources that we would need to respond to that type of incident. Again, the response phase, that's the flashy side of it. That's why when we're actually out there responding to that emergency and try to mitigate that emergency as it's occurring. And then recovery, you see that we work on economic recovery with our municipalities. The County Economic Development Department is very involved throughout that process. We look at debris management. That's where we work with our county public works and other entities that help us remove that debris from our affected areas and go into a recovery atmosphere from that. Also our housing. It's important if we have displaced residents to work with our housing department to see if there's things that we could do to assist, whether it's from private organizations or through county housing opportunities. For us to be prepared, it takes all of us. You see all the bubbles up there, elected officials, our public safety agencies, the local governments, our partner agencies. Again, we're partnering with our, in this case, the railroads. They're actually performing their due diligence and working with our local emergency planning committee at the county level and working with training our first responders, free of charge to them to actually go and learn how to deal with these types of emergencies. So that also then goes into our private industry as well to work with them on how do we address these emergencies. And naturally our communities, because it takes all of us working collaboratively to be able to be prepared for these types of situations. So I want to focus a little bit on response. The challenge we have with response, you heard about the UN 1267 number. Just wanted to touch a little bit on that. That could have anything from light crude to heavy crude. They call it sweet crude, which is pretty much consistent the way gasoline is, all the way up to the consistency of what they call sour crude or heavier crude, which is more like your diesel fuels. So if you think of the difference between gasoline and diesel from a flammable perspective, gasoline ignites very easily compared to diesel fuel, which you have to really stand there with, in some cases, a road flare, putting direct heat and flame impingement on it to have it light. So that's the challenge that our first responders have, is the fact that catch-all of a UN 1267, we as first responders are going to take a conservative approach, so we're going to plan for the worst case scenario. So that would be the lighter crude oil that is easier to ignite. Basically, when a response occurs, again, it's up to those local jurisdictions to have their public safety entities immediately respond to that event. So we work very closely with them in preparing to be able to respond with them and support them. We're basically a force multiplier to those local responders at the county level. We have our mobile command post. Oh, that was interesting. There we go. We have our mobile command post to coordinate emergency communications. We have additional fire suppression equipment that we can respond with to assist their needs. We have specialty response trailers and equipment to address the types of emergencies that you see during rail emergencies. A lot of our rails are along rivers as well, so we have the river containment boom trailer that you saw. This is something that we looked at from our task force level of having the appropriate foam capability for these types of events. Two ways to look at it. Yes, foam can help extinguish a fire. Foam is a blanketing agent that acts as a vapor suppression agent to that crude oil as well. So these have been very beneficial to us to purchase and then put out throughout our response organizations to be able to immediately respond, put a vapor suppression barrier down, and or address a flammable liquid fire. Our hazardous materials response program is very robust in Allegheny County to support our local entities. Because our railways are along the rivers, we also had to look at the threat and vulnerability of our rivers. This is our marine unit. Dual purpose to it. Not only can it act as a fire suppression, you see the water turret at the front of the boat, it actually can deploy river boom as well. So if we're looking to try to corral any type of hazardous materials within our rivers, we'll deploy river boom with this unit to support that operation. And just a quick picture of it in fire suppression mode. Again, we're very beneficial to have Region 13 Task Force. We look at all hazards throughout the southwestern Pennsylvania. That's the 13 counties of southwestern Pennsylvania, including the city of Pittsburgh. We just added a 14th county in Venango County, joined our task force as well. We work collaboratively to try to look at the larger picture and support our local municipalities. Next, I'll turn it over to Ray so he can talk from our perspective as we perform commodity flow studies, look at hazardous materials that are transported throughout Allegheny County. We then provide that information to our local municipalities so they can incorporate that piece of information into their emergency response plans and incident action plans. Right?